Minister on that question.
Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and it's a pleasure to speak to the committee stages and part one of this Trade Safeguard Measures Bill. I'm particularly interested because these are the committee stages, Mr Chairman, and your rulings recently have required us to stay very much on task, even though we are debating fairly widely across the whole of part one. Because the importance of the committee stages, as I understand them, Mr Chairman, is that the Minister defends the legislation. The Minister is required to defend and explain, if necessary, clause by clause, this legislation. It has come into the House in the Minister's name. He is responsible for it, and he must answer questions about every clause. And I would like to begin, but before I start on that tack, Mr Chair, can I just say one thing in response to the member who's just resumed his seat? This bill was introduced by the Honourable Leanne Dalzell on the 9th of September in 2008, and then there was an election a couple of months later. It was referred to the Select Committee on the 11th of March 2009. It was reported back from the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Select Committee, on which I sat and deliberated on this bill, on the 7th of July 2009. So it only took from March to July to dispose of the bill at the Select Committee stage. Since then, Mr Chair, it has languished on the order paper for nearly 3 years, 3 whole years. So I don't want to hear another squeak out of that member about whether or not this bill should have arrived in the House earlier. Of course it should have arrived earlier, and it was entirely the government's fault and responsibility that it hasn't. But can I say on that note that I'm quite glad that this has arrived at the committee stages today, because it gives me an opportunity to ask this Minister in the chair what he understands by some of the clauses. I was present when he gave the first reading. It was an automaton kind of speech, and it was clear that he wasn't very au fait with the bill itself. So I would like him to take a call any time he likes this evening. And let's start with the introduction. I would like this Minister to demonstrate his competence in this bill by explaining what the introduction to the bill means when it says that it promotes efficient, transparent and objective investigative and decision-making processes. I would like to know what this Minister understands by the word transparent. Does he understand that yes means yes and no means no? Does he understand that when he is asked a yes-no question, a closed question, that his two options are to say yes or no? That it's reasonably simple to answer a closed question. Does he understand that transparency is required in all a minister's dealings? And even if it is behaviour prior to his entry back to Parliament and his taking up a ministerial warrant, the nature of the man and the behaviour beforehand goes to what we can expect a minister to uphold. I'd also like to know what the Minister understands by objective, investigative and decision-making processes. Objective investigative processes. Are they characterised by obfuscation, or are they characterised by clarity and a distance, an objectivity? Even if under legal advice, is obfuscation the same as objective, investigative and decision-making processes, or is something more required of the Minister in charge of this bill? This is a Trade Safeguard Measures Bill. Does this Minister understand the meaning of the word safeguard? Does he understand that there is more to the law than the words on the page. There is more to the Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does he understand that, in fact, the intention, the import, the ethical nature of conduct also goes to how laws are made in this House? This minister, whose ethical behaviour seems not to be a problem for the Prime Minister.
Order. Now, just take a seat. Now, this isn't an opportunity to do a character assassination about allegation to the minister. Okay. And I think that the member had done quite well up to that point. And it's about the content of part one we are debating. And I'm not going to tolerate the allegation side to come in the way the member just did it. Right. Honourable Marianne Hobbs.
No. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Marianne Street. Marianne Street.
Sorry. Can I apologise to the member?
Where is Bob?
And I think perhaps I could just make the comparative that the member, Honourable Marianne Hobbs, when she was in the chair, was very prescriptive about being on message. And I was probably thinking of her when I inadvertently called the member by that name, and for that I apologise. The Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's fine. I take it as a compliment, and to have Marianne Hobbs channelled in this way may, in fact, be quite useful in this debate. However, Mr. Chairman, and then let me turn to clause 10 in part 1, which talks about access to information relevant to safeguard investigation and treatment of confidential information. Could we please have the Minister's explanation of what is meant by safeguard investigation and treatment of confidential information? In these terms, Mr. Chair, in the terms of this bill, what is understood by confidential information? Is it like any other kind of meaning of confidential information, that is, information that may not be disclosed? And on what grounds would that information not be disclosed? I would invite the Minister to get on his feet at some point in these committee stages. Any time would be fine, and explain safeguard, explain confidential, and explain how this legislation can be deemed to be doing all the things it says it wants to do with this minister in charge. Mr. Speaker, this is an important piece of legislation. It was disposed of quickly by the Select Committee. It has been sat on by this government for no good purpose other than the fact that they can't organise their way out of a paper bag, and so it's not got to the top of the order paper until such time as they couldn't think of what else to do. So they've put it in as a bit of a gap filler, and it does resonate. It does resonate. Of course, we are wanting a system that is compliant with World Trade Organisation requirements. There are preventions in here that protect and safeguard New Zealand trade and New Zealand industry, and they are important and they are part of the safeguard measures. But over and above all that, Mr. Chairman, we have to be able to have confidence that this government understands the meaning of the words on the page, and it is not clear to this side of the House that we have a government that understands the meaning of the words on the page. Mr. Chair.
Chairman.
Honourable Tau Henare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do know that